Let's move on to Apple's earnings. Apple reported 124 billion in total revenue, up 4% year over year, and net income of 36 billion, up 7% year over year. Shares rose in after-hours trading despite mixed signals in key areas. And so Ben Thompson wrote a quick review of Apple's earnings, and then he asked Deep Research, OpenAI's new research tool, to do the same twice. And it was very interesting listening to the Deep Research result. It wasn't able to really create Ben's voice, but it did hit some of the analysis, but it was way more verbose. It was like pages and pages instead of like a nice little summary. So let's go through the Stratechery update and then give you some highlights on what's going on with Apple these days. So the Wall Street Journal reported Apple's iPhone sales fell in the all-important December quarter, a sign that its artificial intelligence software has yet to kick off a new cycle of growth for its most valuable product. On Thursday, Apple reported that iPhone sales for the quarter were down nearly 1% from the year prior to 69.1 billion, a miss from the 70.7 billion analysts were projecting, according to FactSet. Apple's total revenue was 124.3 billion, rising almost 4% from the same quarter. Net income was 36 billion, up more than 7%. And so Apple shares rose. The company said it said in its earnings report that sales dropped in China by more than 11%, missing the 20 billion. Analysts wanted them to do 20 billion, and they only did 18.5. Apple's newly appointed chief financial officer, Kevin Perek, said that the company saw better iPhone 16 sales in markets where its new AI tools called Apple Intelligence have been launched. And so Apple Intelligence is not available in Europe and it's not available in China. And so they're saying, hey, the only reason that we're not selling more iPhones is because our amazing Apple Intelligence isn't there. And they might get put in the truth zone here.
Which is, literally insane. I don't know a single person who benefits from Apple Intelligence other than a laugh or two here or there when it just badly summarizes something. So really, seemingly a product that should have not been widely, shipped. And just needed quite a bit more testing. So to be coming in here and saying iPhone sales are declining because we're not properly summarizing people's texts is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, to put on the steel helmet for a second and steel man this a little bit, there is something to be said for a lot of the advertising campaigns around the new phone have been driven and focused on Apple Intelligence. And so if that feature is not available and you see that ad, even if you've never tested it or you don't look at a review, you're just seeing the marketing, then you're like, well, I'm going to wait until the product that they're marketing. And this was a thing that happened in the States. Like in the US, Apple was running tons of ads around Apple Intelligence, Apple Intelligence, Apple Intelligence, and it wasn't available for months after the phone started shipping. And so you could imagine in America, a lot of people saying, well, yeah, I am excited. I do want to try that, but I'm going to wait until it's actually available. Now, obviously,
the issue is the negative word of mouth is very real in the sense that people that do have access to Apple Intelligence are posting screenshots of the completely botched summaries of which is I'm sure Apple Intelligence has other features that maybe are valuable, but
And so if we go to Unusual Whales summarizes the Q1 25 earnings for Apple. Earnings per share were at $2.40. This was a beat. They were estimated to make $2.35. Revenue was $124.3. This was also a beat. And iPhone revenues were down at 69 instead of 71. And
most importantly, down year over year. So their golden goose, the iPhone, is not selling as well as it was last year.
It didn't fall off a cliff. If you look at US, it's just completely flat. Like it's a completely mature market. Everyone that has an iPhone has one. Everyone that wants one has one, and they're just continuously selling the same amount. And so if if you look at what Ben says, he says, first, it's notable that iPhone sales could be down year over year, even as Apple reports both record revenue and record profits. The story, of course, is services, as it has been for a while now. It's striking, though, that services doesn't just mean record profits, thanks to the higher margins, but also record revenues, thanks to the absolute number. The long-run increase as a share of Apple's revenue on a trailing 12-month basis to smooth out seasonality has been relentless. And so Apple has been a tear with their services. Of course, this is like the App Store. Second, Greater China's year-over-year revenue was down for the 6th straight quarter, just as it has been for 9 of the last 12. I graphed China's trailing 12-month revenue to avoid seasonality with year-over-year quarterly growth. And so revenue has been declining in China for several quarters. The key takeaway here is that the recent decline in revenue isn't a new issue, but actually a continuation of a trend that started nearly a decade ago. The iPhone 6 took China by storm, but Apple built up a large user base, but it never really penetrated beyond the tier 1 cities. The one exception was the Huawei chip ban in 2020, which drove premium Android users to Apple. Apple has done pretty well to maintain its customer base.
One thing to note, China is no longer adding people to its major cities. There's actually been an exodus from cities, which is a whole other issue in China right now, leading to Peter Zeihan has a good bit on basically how much oversupply there is from a housing standpoint in Chinese cities. And so Apple's not going to get the benefit of people moving to tier 1 cities and telling themselves, oh, I should get an iPhone now. It's just not happening anymore.
Yeah. And so there's a little bit of a question here. What's missing is the long paeans to China's middle class and Apple's massive opportunity in the country that used to characterize these earnings calls. So Apple used to say, oh, when we hit China's middle class with our iPhones, that's when we're going to be really ripping in China. And it just kind of never happened. Apple is hoping for a bit of a bump from government stimulus, but that's a pretty weak sauce. I love it, Ben. Get them. The reality is that China as a growth opportunity for Apple seems truly finished. The best hope for now is that revenue doesn't decline too precipitously. And then lastly, Apple's executives, including Tim Cook, mentioned a couple times that Apple had better growth where Apple Intelligence had launched. And Ben is putting him in the truth zone. I'm not buying it as a real driver. Cook's framing suggests that China's growth will return when Apple Intelligence arrives. I think it's more likely that China's decline was independent of Apple Intelligence being there or not, but that at least it gives the company a chance to point out that non-Apple Intelligence countries grew less on average because they include China. In fact, Europe outgrew the US in iPhone sales, and they don't have Apple Intelligence at all, with the exception of the UK for a couple weeks in December. And so why would iPhone sales grow in Europe where they don't have Apple Intelligence if Apple Intelligence was that important? And so it's a very, very good question. And I like that. And then he drops these massive research reports from OpenAI Deep Research, and it is a remarkable report. It's great. It pulls in product segments and deep dives, and can create not just bullet points but also tables, and it really does a good job of analyzing it. But what his conclusion from all of this was that while it was impressive, there's nothing novel in the analysis, and it only really worked. He says it's also the case that the reason why the second answer is so good and insightful is precisely because I gave the model specific talking points instead of asking it to come up with its own insight. In other words, the model does a much better job of filling out a thesis than coming up with one. And so it seems like it's great. Deep Research is super great for, hey, I already read the report. I understand this. I have a thesis. I just need you to go and pull together all the different quotes and data that support and substantiate that thesis, as opposed to really just saying, hey, Apple research report, go. You're not going to get something as novel.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's the way we use it too. We use it to speed up the process of researching the show, but then ultimately the takes are artisanal. So
Exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, Ben actually talks about that, where he says, in 2022, before ChatGPT, Ben was talking about how AI will affect publishing and just communication and the information economy. And so he's broken down the value chain into 5 steps: creation, substantiation, duplication, distribution, and consumption. And so there's this evolution of the value chain where it all started with when writing, though unbundled consumption, increasing the number of people who could consume an idea. Then the new bottleneck was duplication. And so the printing press removed the bottleneck for distribution, dramatically increasing the number of ideas that could be economically distributed. Then the new bottleneck was distribution, which is to say that was the new place to make money. Thus, the aforementioned profitability of newspapers, because the printing press could copy, but then you needed to actually get it to someone. So owning a distribution line was very important. Then that was removed by the internet which made distribution free and available to anyone. And there was one final bundle: creation and substantiation of an idea. And so you have an idea. How do you actually create it? And then the internet makes it free to distribute. It can be duplicated, obviously, through the printing press and through the internet, and it can be consumed anywhere. And that is exactly what AI does. It takes the human's ideas, the creation, and substantiates them. And obviously, this is most prominently viewed in the AI generative image models, because it would take me forever to paint a painting of a sci-fi thing. But if I come up with a good prompt, I can just get it instantiated immediately. I can post it on Twitter. It's distributed. And if it's a good idea, everything else downstream is completely egalitarian and taken care of. And so it's interesting that now he has the ability to have a good take about Apple and substantiate it more quickly with AI in some ways. I don't think he will be using this.
But one of the issues with deep research right now that was pointed out by some poster, I don't recall their name, but they were saying that what deep research is doing, it doesn't necessarily have access to all the things that it's sourcing from, and so it will summarize the abstract of a source, which is not or a specific study, something like that. Which isn't necessarily the actual material that you want to pull from, right?
I ran into this.
Abstract is just kind of like a teaser for the actual piece. Maybe has some light data.
And so, bringing your own sources, bringing your own facts. I mean, a lot of these, like the best research reports on Apple, are often by analysts that talk to the CEO on background or have phone calls. I mean, at Citadel, their global macro team, or was it their global macro team? One of their public markets teams conducted thousands of CEO interviews to understand how they were thinking about the business while they were trading the stock. And this happens all the time. You know, some big hedge fund calls up the CFO and says, "Hey, tell me how things are going off the earnings call." You can't share material non-public information, but you can get a vibe check from this person and get a ton of more context and more information that could inform your decision. And so if that's not on the internet and it's not baked into the LLM and it's not available for the LLM to pull, you're never going to get that analysis. So there will still be a huge alpha and huge premium, not just on the interesting thinking and being able to puzzle things together, which I think humans are still uniquely good at, but also just bringing new facts to the system. Bringing new tokens.
You can't imagine a future, though, that the time it takes for Ben Thompson to write a essay dropped by 90%, because he says, "Hey, basically look at my writing style, like look at my reporting, and have access to my entire database of content." Because he does a lot of this, right? Referencing back old material, old writing. David Senra does the same thing with Founders Podcast, where he says, "Hey, you know what? The McDonald's founder does something very similar to Brad Jacobs," and so it's like models can do that pretty well in terms of helping draw comparisons, but ultimately, the delivery and the stamp, I think, matters a lot, especially with Ben's work.
And so I think we should close out with a post that you ripped yesterday that got over 1 million views. Jordy says on X, "Apple is giving up on VR. Their current marketing is laughable, and they're sitting on $162 billion of cash. At this point, they should just buy an F1 team, sign Verstappen, and win some championships. If we're entertained, maybe we'll forget about the company they used to be."
And let me break it down. So this I think it resonated just because it's a funny idea, Apple getting into F1, and I would rather them spend their brand marketing dollars on doing, having an F1 team than doing these Genmoji campaigns that are
Completely
just
agree.
like super cringe at this point.
Oh yeah.
And so this struck a chord within the VR, AR, MR community because they were saying, a lot of people are saying they're not giving up on VR. A lot of people were saying, well, they didn't even do VR, it's AR, and no, it's actually MR. So a lot of sort of disagreement on just their product strategy in general. We had been referencing, I think 2 days ago, Mark Gurman's article about how they did kill a project internally related to that would have been competitive with Meta Ray-Bans, which
No, not that. It was a like a pro level device for
connected to your computer.
connected to your Mac to replace your 6-screen Giga Chad Finance Bro setup, basically. Which is admittedly like a very niche product, but Ben Thompson would talked about it and he said, this is exactly what I wanted. This is the product that I wanted. And for me, I want that product too. I would have loved it. But I mean, there's a lot of reasons they could have killed it. We don't even really know. And they got so many projects on. But I think the sentiment is correct. They didn't get across the finish line.
Yeah. What seems obvious is that, and it appears that they don't have the conviction to continue with the pace at which they had been spending on the development of future products that may not be hits, right? And so it's easy to I think the winner out of this is certainly not consumers, but it's more so, somebody like Zuck who's said, I'm willing to spend tens of billions of dollars to own the next personal computing platform. So, and then somebody took issue with Verstappen. I don't make F1 driver signings, so feel free to sound off on who you think would be a better fit. But yeah, and then the irony was that yesterday morning they also launched this Invites product, which is basically somewhat of a clone of Partiful. I do think it's a pretty different audience, and I don't see Apple just crushing on building a social media app, which their Invites product is in some ways. But anyways, I think they're I would like the timing of all of this, iPhone sales peaking and actually dropping. We don't know if they're actually peaking yet, but they hit some type of local top. And then simultaneously, like not having the conviction to really go founder mode and spend the necessary R&D dollars to develop and really own that next category. Only time will tell. But this is a company that Apple. Somebody in the comments also phrased it as Apple's like a new luxury brand now, where they make the best phone, but they're no longer the company, the hardcore 0 to 1 innovator. And I think that's okay, right? Like, I'm not trying to argue here that Apple's, I don't even necessarily think they're in trouble. They're just not the company that I was that they were when I was a kid, when every campaign was inspiring, every product was trying to push the boundaries of what was possible in terms of, user joy and also performance and all these other things. And so anyways, hopefully, I do think that it will become more and more clear that Tim Cook seems to be able to generally manage this like luxury brand type version of Apple, but it doesn't feel obvious that they have the sort of visionary product leadership that's going to have them have whatever comes post iPhone, right? Whether it looks more like Neuralink or it looks more like, Apple Vision Pro.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like Google. They have erected a toll booth on the world and the internet and the digital economy. Everyone buys their phones, and that has flatlined. They have reached their market saturation on their phones, and now they're taking a cut of all the transactions that happen. That's the service revenue. The service revenue is growing. That's why their stock went up, even though they've clearly reached saturation on the hardware side. And so it's kind of like, they're enjoying the fruits of their labors, and they're just going to sit back and enjoy, the massive money that just comes in. And maybe they'll still work on ambitious projects here and there, but that doesn't seem super baked into the culture at this point. And that's unfortunate because I think as tech people, we always look to Apple as like, oh man, the next cool thing from Apple is
The
going to be
epitome of
incredible.
amazing hardware. Yeah.
Always, even like the
And
first
it's funny
iPad,
that
it was
the
mind
areas,
blowing. Yeah.
yeah, the areas in which the iPhone is pretty perfect, right? So
Yeah.
it's not meant to throw shade at the device, but the area for me as a consumer that I would actually want them to try to, 10x improvement is battery, right? Like the
Printers.
camera is good enough, but the issue with them, if they massively improve their battery, that's a huge reason that people, actually end up renewing their, buying a new device. So there's sort of not the same incentive to be like, hey, let's spend $10 billion and try to build a 10x better battery, right? I just don't see them doing that because it's not necessarily in the interests of growing sales.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of places where they've clearly tugged in either direction. They've made the phones like a little bit bigger and they're too big, and a little bit smaller and they're too small. And they've just found they've kind of min-maxed everything to the point where everyone wants the same thing, and they've just created like.
And even my favorite is that by putting
bump.
By having that this is not actually level unless you have a case. So how do you walk out of the? Obviously, I don't use a case, but how do you walk? Most people are like, well, if I put my phone on the ground and it's gonna not even sit on a flat surface, okay, I'll buy the Apple case on the way out, and that's just them squeezing an extra $45 of net revenue out of you, and it's a beautiful business, but.
And that's why the stock's
anyway.
up, and it's a safe place. It feels like a safe place to put your money because it's not going anywhere. It's just so Lindy.
Yeah, and if you look at it from the lens of like LVMH being somewhere in the range of a $250 to $350 billion company, and Apple being a multi-trillion-dollar, like being worth an order of magnitude more than that, it makes sense, right?
Yeah,
like
totally.
The price is
I mean, imagine if LVMH could take a cut of everything that you put in a Birkin bag or whatever. Is that them? Do they own Birkin? They own her.
No, they don't. That was the one that got away.
That was the one that got away. But I mean, if you buy some Louis Vuitton, imagine every other piece of clothing that you put on when you're wearing an Hermes belt or I guess an LVMH piece of clothing. They take a cut of. That's the Apple model, and so it's so much more profitable.
No, it's more than that. It's like it's hey, when you are wearing our shirt, we're gonna tax everything that you do throughout your day.
That's basically what the iPhone is.
It's a beautiful thing. So I'm not a full Apple hater. I just I love them. I just want to see more. That's all.
I want to see more, and I want more ambitious VR headsets. I want more risks. I want more F1 teams. Give us an F1 team, Apple.
Yeah.
Design the car. Design the car.
Yeah.
Build the motor. Build the engine.
Yeah, or the other people that critique was like, okay, you could have bought Tesla in 2018, 2019 and owned the car, right? Like
I don't know if that was an option. You remember that deal? They had the money, but Elon said, "I'll only do it if I can be the CEO of the parent company."
Yeah. No, I'm not saying it was a good deal, but they also could have 2x the price and still done, very well from that, right?
Totally.